Dr. Evelyn Carter had always been a woman driven by curiosity. From the moment she stepped into the world of forensic anthropology, her mind was consumed with questions about life, death, and everything that happened in between. She wasn't just interested in solving crimes or understanding how bodies decomposed. She wanted to push the boundaries of what science could uncover. It was this relentless pursuit of knowledge that led her to propose one of the most unusual experiments anyone at the Institute of Postmortem Studies had ever heard of. Evelyn's idea was simple on paper, but wildly ambitious in practice. She wanted to place a camera inside a coffin. Not just any camera, though. This would be a state-of-the-art device built to withstand the harsh conditions underground. It would capture every detail of what happened after burial, from the decomposition process to the changes in the environment around the body. Her goal was to gather data that could help revolutionize fields like forensics, archaeology, and even medicine. But more than that, she hoped to answer some of humanity's oldest questions about death itself. At first, her colleagues were skeptical. They raised concerns about ethics, logistics, and whether such an experiment was even possible. Some argued that it might be disrespectful to the deceased, while others worried about the technical challenges. Cameras weren't designed to operate for months in complete darkness, surrounded by damp soil and decaying matter. And then there was the cost. Such an endeavor would require significant funding and resources. But Evelyn was undeterred. She spent weeks preparing presentations, gathering research papers, and consulting experts in various fields to prove that her plan was feasible. Slowly but surely, she won over key members of the Institute, including its director, Dr. Richard Hayes, who agreed to back her project. With approval secured, Evelyn turned her attention to assembling her team. She handpicked individuals who shared her passion for discovery. Sarah, a tech genius specializing in durable hardware. Marcus, a biochemist fascinated by decomposition processes, and Liam, a geologist who could analyze soil composition. Together, they formed a tight-knit group determined to make history. Over countless meetings, late-night brainstorming sessions, and trial runs, they fine-tuned their approach. The camera they developed was encased in titanium to protect it from moisture and pressure. Equipped with infrared sensors and advanced batteries, it could record continuously for up to 3 months without interruption. One of the biggest hurdles they faced was obtaining permission to use human remains for the experiment. After much negotiation, they received clearance to use unclaimed bodies from local morgues, individuals whose identities were unknown and whose families hadn't come forward to claim them. While this solved their immediate problem, it also added another layer of complexity to the project. Handling human remains required sensitivity and respect, something Evelyn emphasized repeatedly to her team. "We're not just dealing with objects here," she reminded them during one meeting. "These are people. We owe it to them to treat their bodies with dignity." As preparations neared completion, excitement buzzed through the lab. Boxes filled with equipment lined the walls, and diagrams detailing the experiment covered every available surface. Yet amid the anticipation, a subtle undercurrent of unease began to creep in. Late one evening, as Evelyn reviewed the final checklist, she found herself staring at the empty coffin sitting in the corner of the room. Its polished wood gleamed under the fluorescent lights, almost inviting her to imagine what lay ahead. For the first time, doubt flickered in her mind. What if something went wrong? What if the camera failed, or worse, captured something they couldn't explain? She shook off the thought almost immediately. Science was all about taking risks, she told herself. Every great discovery came with uncertainty. Still, the image of that coffin lingered in her mind long after she left the lab that night. As she drove home, the streets quiet and deserted, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into uncharted territory, not just scientifically, but perhaps spiritually as well. The day of the burial arrived sooner than anyone expected. The team gathered at a remote cemetery reserved exclusively for scientific research. It was a somber place, surrounded by dense trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. A light drizzle fell from the sky, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The chosen subject, a middle-aged man whose identity remained a mystery, lay peacefully inside the coffin. His face was calm, almost serene, as if he were simply sleeping. Evelyn stood beside the grave, watching as the team carefully positioned the camera above his chest. Each movement felt deliberate, precise, as though they were handling something far more delicate than a piece of technology. Before sealing the coffin, Evelyn paused. She reached out and touched its smooth surface, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. For a brief moment, she wondered what it must feel like to lie inside, completely alone in the dark. Then she shook her head, reminding herself why they were doing this. "This is for science," she murmured softly, repeating the mantra that had kept her going through countless doubts and obstacles. With a deep breath, she signaled for the team to proceed. The coffin was lowered into the ground, and the earth swallowed it whole. Standing there afterward, Evelyn felt a strange mix of emotions: pride, fear, curiosity, all swirling together in a way that made her heart race. She glanced at her team, noticing the same mixture of awe and apprehension reflected in their faces. None of them spoke as they packed up their gear and headed back to the lab. The real work was about to begin. The morning after the burial, the team gathered in their lab, buzzing with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. The camera inside the coffin was set to transmit footage wirelessly, but the first batch of data wouldn't arrive until later, that evening. In the meantime, Evelyn and her team busied themselves reviewing plans, double-checking equipment, and discussing what they might expect to see. While decomposition was a natural process, no one had ever documented it in real time, from inside a sealed coffin. There were so many unknowns. How quickly would the body begin to change? How would the soil react to the presence of the coffin? Would there be any surprises lurking beneath the surface? Evelyn tried to focus on these practical questions, but her mind kept drifting back to the cemetery. She couldn't shake the image of the coffin being lowered into the ground, disappearing beneath layers of damp earth. It wasn't just the act of burying the body that unsettled her. It was the finality of it. Once the lid was closed and the soil packed tight, there was no turning back. Whatever happened next would unfold without interference, hidden from view except for the silent eye of the camera. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. As the hours ticked by, the atmosphere in the lab grew tense. Sarah, the tech expert, fiddled endlessly with her laptop, running diagnostics and ensuring the wireless connection was stable. Marcus paced back and forth, muttering under his breath about bacteria and enzymes while clutching a notebook filled with scribbled equations. Liam sat quietly at the far end of the room, staring out the window as if lost in thought. Only Evelyn seemed outwardly composed, though her calm demeanor masked a storm of emotions brewing inside her. When evening finally arrived, the team huddled around a large monitor, waiting for the first transmission to come through. The screen flickered to life, displaying a grainy but clear image of the interior of the coffin. The body lay motionless, bathed in the faint glow of infrared light. Everything appeared exactly as they had left it, peaceful, still, almost serene. For a moment, the tension in the room eased. Perhaps this wouldn't be so strange after all. But then something caught Evelyn's eye, a tiny movement near the base of the coffin. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of the light or a glitch in the camera. But as she leaned closer, she realized it wasn't either of those things. Small, wriggling shapes had begun to appear on the surface of the body. Maggots. They moved slowly at first, clustering around areas where the skin was already thinning. It was grotesque, yet fascinating, a glimpse into nature's relentless cycle of decay. "Look at this," Evelyn said, pointing to the screen. Her voice was steady, but there was an undeniable note of awe in her tone. "This is exactly what we wanted to capture." Marcus nodded enthusiastically, pulling out his notebook to jot down observations. The larvae must have hatched from eggs laid shortly before burial. Flies are incredibly efficient. They can find a body within minutes of death. Liam chimed in, his earlier silence giving way to curiosity. And now they're doing their job, breaking down tissue layer by layer. It's like watching an ecosystem form right before our eyes. For the next hour, The team watched intently as the maggots multiplied, spreading across the body in waves. Their movements were methodical, almost hypnotic. Despite the grim subject matter, there was a strange beauty to it, the way life persisted, even in death, transforming one form into another. Yet as engrossed as they were, none of them noticed the subtle changes occurring elsewhere in the frame. It wasn't until day 5 that the anomalies began to appear. Late one night, when only Evelyn and Sarah remained in the lab, the footage revealed something unusual. Faint vibrations rippled across the walls of the coffin, barely perceptible but unmistakable. At first, they thought it might be caused by shifting soil or settling earth. After all, the ground above the coffin was constantly changing due to moisture and temperature fluctuations. But when the same pattern repeated itself several nights in a row, unease crept into their discussions. "What do you think it could be?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed as she replayed the clip. "It doesn't look like normal soil movement." Evelyn hesitated, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as nothing more than a technical issue or environmental noise. But another part, the part driven by instinct, told her otherwise. "I don't know," she admitted reluctantly, "but I don't think it's random." Over the next few days, the team debated possible explanations. Marcus suggested that gas buildup from decomposition might be causing pressure against the coffin walls. Liam proposed that tree roots growing nearby could be pressing into the soil above the grave. Neither theory fully satisfied Evelyn, however. Something about the timing and rhythm of the vibrations felt deliberate, almost alive. By day 7, the situation took a darker turn. As they reviewed the latest footage, the camera captured something that sent chills down everyone's spines. Near the edge of the frame, shadows darted past too quickly to identify clearly. One moment, the coffin interior was empty. The next, fleeting shapes blurred across the lens. The team rewound the clip multiple times, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Were these insects, reflected light, or something else entirely? Sarah adjusted the brightness and contrast on the monitor, hoping to bring more clarity to the image. When she did, the shapes became slightly more defined but no less mysterious. They looked vaguely humanoid, with elongated limbs and jerky movements. No one spoke as they stared at the screen, each person grappling with their own thoughts. "This isn't normal." Marcus finally broke the silence, his voice trembling. "There's no scientific explanation for this." Evelyn clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. "We need more data," she said firmly. "Let's not jump to conclusions until we understand what we're dealing with." Despite her words, doubt gnawed at her insides. What if they had stumbled onto something beyond the realm of science? What if the experiment had awakened forces they couldn't control? These questions haunted her long after the others left the lab, leaving her alone with the flickering images on the screen. That night, Evelyn found herself unable to sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, her mind racing with possibilities. Was it possible that the vibrations and shadows were connected? Could there be something, or someone, outside the coffin, drawn to it for reasons they couldn't comprehend? The idea was absurd, yet it refused to leave her thoughts. The next morning, she arrived at the lab early, determined to investigate further. She pored over every piece of footage, searching for patterns or clues. By mid-afternoon, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. On day 9, the camera had picked up faint tapping sounds emanating from above the coffin lid. The noise was soft and sporadic, almost hesitant, but undeniably present. It sounded like fingers or claws scraping against wood. Evelyn called an emergency meeting, playing the audio clip for the team. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to outright fear. Some argued that animals must be responsible, while others insisted it was evidence of structural instability in the coffin. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. They were witnessing something they couldn't explain. "We need to go back," Evelyn declared, her voice resolute despite the knot of dread in her stomach. "We have to see for ourselves what's happening out there." No one disagreed. Whatever answers they sought lay buried beneath the soil, and they were running out of time to uncover them. The decision to return to the cemetery weighed heavily on Evelyn and her team. They knew it wasn't going to be an ordinary visit. It was a step into uncertainty, a confrontation with something they couldn't yet fully comprehend. The tapping. Sounds from above the coffin lid had grown louder and more frequent over the past few days, creating an unshakable sense of unease. Evelyn felt torn between her scientific instincts, which demanded answers, and the creeping dread that whispered, warnings in the back of her mind. But she reminded herself why they had started this project in the first place, to push boundaries, uncover truths, and advance human understanding. If they abandoned the experiment now, all their efforts would have been for nothing. On the morning of their trip, the air was thick with anticipation and fear. The team gathered at the lab early, loading shovels, flashlights, cameras, and other equipment into the van. No one spoke much during the drive. The silence was broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of papers, as Sarah double-checked the wireless readings from the buried camera. The sky above them was overcast, casting long shadows across the road. It matched the mood perfectly. Dark, uncertain, foreboding. When they arrived at the cemetery, the place felt different. The trees loomed taller, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. A cold wind swept through the rows of headstones, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth. Evelyn glanced around, trying to shake off the feeling that they were being watched. She told herself it was just nerves, but the sensation lingered, prickling at the edges of her awareness. They reached the grave quickly, marked by a simple wooden cross planted atop the freshly turned soil. At first glance, everything seemed undisturbed. There were no signs of animal activity, no paw prints, no claw marks, nothing to suggest anything unusual had happened here. Yet, as Evelyn knelt beside the mound of dirt, her fingers brushing against the loose soil, she couldn't ignore the tension tightening her chest. Something about this spot felt wrong. "Let's dig," she said finally, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. "We need to see what's going on." The team got to work immediately, taking turns with the shovels. The soil was soft and yielded easily, making the task less physically demanding than it could have been. Still, every scoop brought them closer to whatever lay beneath, heightening the suspense. As the hole deepened, conversations dwindled until the only sounds were the rhythmic scrape of metal against earth and the occasional grunt of effort. After nearly an hour of digging, they reached the coffin. It sat silently in its earthen tomb, exactly where they had left it. For a moment, Evelyn allowed herself to feel a flicker of relief. Maybe the strange noises and shadows were just figments of their imagination, or glitches in the camera system. Perhaps the coffin itself was intact, untouched by anything unnatural. But when they pried open the lid, that fragile hope shattered. The body inside was still decomposing as expected, maggots writhing across its flesh. But something else caught their attention immediately. Around the edges of the coffin, faint scratches marred the polished wood. They looked fresh, sharp, as though made recently by something with considerable strength. And then there were the claw-like impressions near the headrest, deep gouges that sent a chill down everyone's spines. "What could have done this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He leaned closer, examining the marks with a flashlight. "These aren't from animals. They're too deliberate." Evelyn didn't answer right away. Instead, she scanned the interior of the coffin again, searching for anything else out of place. Her eyes landed on the camera mounted above the body. It was slightly tilted, as if nudged or bumped. She adjusted it carefully, ensuring it was still functioning properly before turning her attention back to the group. "We need to figure out what's causing these disturbances," she said firmly, forcing confidence into her tone. "Whatever it is, it's interacting with the coffin directly. That means it's close." Liam frowned, glancing nervously at the surrounding soil. "Close? You mean outside the coffin?" "It has to be," Evelyn replied. "The vibrations, the tapping, the scratches, they're all external. Something is moving around up there." The implication hung heavy in the air. None of them wanted to say it aloud, but the possibility was undeniable. Whatever was responsible for the anomalies wasn't just nearby. It was intelligent enough to target the coffin specifically. Before sealing the coffin again, Evelyn decided to take extra precautions. She instructed the team to install additional sensors around the perimeter of the grave. These devices were designed to detect movement, pressure changes, and even temperature fluctuations in the soil. If anything, or anyone, approached the site, they'd know about it instantly. Liam handled the setup, burying the sensors carefully so as not to disturb the area further. As they worked, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Every creak of the shovel, every rustle of leaves overhead set their nerves on edge. Sarah kept checking the live feed from the camera, her face pale as she monitored the footage for any new developments. So far, everything remained quiet. But that only added to the suspense. What if something was waiting, biding its time? By the time they finished, dusk had settled over the cemetery, casting long shadows that stretched like grasping hands across the graves. Evelyn stood beside the refilled grave, staring at the small wooden marker. Despite her determination to stay rational, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were leaving behind more than just a coffin. They were leaving behind a mystery that might never be solved. Back at the lab, the team reviewed the data from the newly installed sensors. For the first few hours, everything appeared normal. The soil shifted slightly due to settling, and minor temperature changes occurred as night fell. But then, shortly after midnight, the sensors picked up something extraordinary. Movement, not random or sporadic, but deliberate and patterned. Something large and heavy was circling the grave, pressing down on the soil in measured intervals. "There," Sarah exclaimed, pointing to the screen. "Look at this." The others crowded around, watching as the readings spiked repeatedly in a circular motion around the burial site. Whatever it wasn't staying in one place. It was pacing, stalking, almost as if it were guarding the coffin. "This doesn't make sense," Marcus muttered, rubbing his temples. "There's no logical explanation for this kind of behavior. Animals don't move like this, and it's too big to be an animal anyway," Liam added grimly. "Whatever it is, it's massive." Evelyn stared at the data, her mind racing. She thought back to the footage they had reviewed earlier, the shadows, the tapping, the claw marks. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. They weren't dealing with something ordinary. This was something beyond the scope of science, something ancient and primal. For the rest of the night, the team stayed glued to their monitors, tracking the movements above the grave. The entity, if that's what it was, never stopped. It circled endlessly, occasionally pausing as if listening or waiting. Each time it did, the tension in the lab reached unbearable levels. No one dared leave their post, fearing that stepping away even for a moment might lead to disaster. As dawn approached, exhaustion began to take its toll. Eyes were red-rimmed, shoulders slumped, but the resolve remained. Evelyn knew they couldn't give up now. They were close, so close, to uncovering the truth. But deep down, she wondered if they were ready for what they might find. The final piece of evidence came just as the sun began to rise. One of the sensors detected a sudden surge of pressure directly above the coffin. Then, silence. The movement stopped completely, as if whatever had been circling had finally decided to act. Evelyn's heart pounded as she turned to the others. "We need to go back," she said, her voice firm despite the fear coursing through her veins. Now. The decision to return to the cemetery so soon after their last visit was not made lightly. Evelyn and her team had spent hours debating whether it was safe, or even sane, to go back. The sensor's data from the previous night painted a chilling picture. Something large, deliberate, and possibly intelligent was circling the grave. It wasn't random movement, it was calculated, almost predatory. And when the pressure readings above the coffin spiked just before dawn, it felt like a warning, a message that whatever was out there knew they were watching. Evelyn couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her gut, but she also couldn't walk away. This was uncharted territory, a phenomenon that defied explanation. As a scientist, she had always believed in the power of observation and analysis. But now, faced with something beyond the realm of logic, she wondered if she was crossing a line she shouldn't. Still, curiosity burned brighter than fear. She convinced herself and her team that they owed it to the project, to science itself, to see this through. If they abandoned the experiment now, they would never know what they were dealing with. And that uncertainty might haunt them far, more than any answer could. By the time they arrived at the cemetery, the sun was high in the sky, casting sharp shadows across the rows of headstones. The air was eerily still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Birds chirped in the distance, but their songs sounded muted, almost hesitant, as if even nature sensed the wrongness of this place. Evelyn tightened her grip on the shovel slung over her shoulder and led the way to the grave. Her footsteps crunched softly against the dry grass, each step heavier than the last. When they reached the site, everything looked unchanged. The wooden marker stood exactly where they had left it, and the soil appeared undisturbed. Yet the sense of unease was palpable. Sarah knelt beside the mound, running her fingers through the loose dirt while examining the ground for signs of recent activity. Marcus paced nervously nearby, clutching his notebook like a shield. Liam stayed close to Evelyn, his eyes scanning the surrounding trees as though expecting something to leap out at them. "Let's get started," Evelyn said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a mix of determination and dread. "We need to dig carefully. Whatever's out there might still be around." The team began excavating, working slowly and methodically. Every shovel of soil was placed gently aside, and every movement was deliberate. They didn't want to provoke whatever had been circling the grave, but they also couldn't afford to waste time. Tension crackled in the air as the hole grew deeper, revealing layers of damp earth and roots tangled together like veins beneath the surface. After nearly 2 hours of digging, they reached the coffin. It lay silently in its earthen tomb, untouched by the morning light. For a brief moment, hope flickered in Evelyn's chest. Maybe the disturbances were caused by animals or natural shifts in the soil. Maybe nothing had changed since their last visit. But when they pried open the lid, that fragile hope evaporated instantly. The body inside was gone. At first, no one spoke. They simply stared into the empty coffin, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. The camera remained mounted above the space where the body had lain, its lens tilted slightly downward as if knocked loose during some violent struggle. In its place were fresh claw marks gouged deep into the lining of the coffin, along with tufts of coarse black hair clinging to the fabric. The sight sent a shiver down everyone's spines. What happened here?" Marcus stammered, his voice trembling. He leaned closer, inspecting the damage with wide, disbelieving eyes. "This isn't possible. Bodies don't just disappear." "No," Evelyn replied, her voice low and steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "But something took it." Liam crouched beside the coffin, picking up one of the strands of hair between his fingers. It was thick and wiry, unlike anything he'd ever seen before. "This doesn't belong to an animal," he said quietly. "And it's definitely not human." Sarah adjusted the camera, rewinding the footage to see if it had captured anything unusual in the hours leading up to their arrival. The screen flickered to life, displaying grainy images of the coffin's interior. At first, everything seemed normal, the body decomposing as expected, maggots wriggling across its flesh. But then, just before sunrise, something extraordinary occurred. Shadows moved across the edges of the frame, too fast to identify clearly. Then came the sound, a soft scraping followed by a series of thuds, as if something heavy were pressing down on the coffin lid from above. Finally, the camera jolted violently, the feed cutting off abruptly. "This is insane," Sarah whispered, her face pale. Something opened the coffin. Something dragged the body out. Evelyn clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay focused. Panic wouldn't solve anything. "We need to figure out what we're dealing with," she said firmly. "Whatever it is, it's strong, intelligent, and capable of bypassing our security measures. That means we're not prepared enough." The team quickly regrouped, discussing their next steps. Evelyn suggested setting up cameras around the perimeter of the grave to monitor the area 24/7. They also decided to install motion-activated floodlights to illuminate the site at night. If whatever had taken the body returned, they wanted to be ready. But deep down, none of them truly believed these precautions would stop it. They were playing a dangerous game, poking at forces they didn't understand. As they worked, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made them jump. Their movements became hurried, almost frantic, as though they were racing against an invisible clock. By the time they finished securing the area, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. Before leaving, Evelyn took one last look at the grave. The empty coffin gaped open like a wound, its presence both haunting and accusatory. She felt a pang of guilt, as though she had disturbed something sacred, something that should have remained buried. But she pushed the thought aside, reminding herself that they were scientists. Fear couldn't dictate their actions. That night, the team gathered in the lab to review the new footage. The cameras surrounding the grave transmitted live feeds to their monitors, providing a panoramic view of the area. At first, everything seemed quiet. The floodlights illuminated the gravesite brightly, creating stark contrasts between light and shadow. Nothing stirred, not even the wind. It was almost peaceful, but then shortly after midnight, the cameras captured something that froze them in place. A massive shape emerged from the darkness at the edge of the frame, moving with eerie grace. It was too large to be a person, too fluid to be an animal. Its silhouette was distorted, shifting unnaturally as it approached the grave. Claws glinted in the light as it paused near the wooden marker, tilting its head as if listening, or waiting. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, her hands flying to her mouth. "What is that?" No one answered. They were too stunned to speak. The creature, if that's what it was, moved closer to the grave, sniffing the air with elongated, snout-like features. Its body rippled with muscle, covered in matted fur that gleamed under the floodlights. When it turned its head toward the camera, they saw its eyes, glowing, feral, and filled with intelligence. For several agonizing minutes, it lingered near the grave, pacing back and forth as if guarding its prize. Then, without warning, it let out a low growl, a sound so primal and guttural that it reverberated through the speakers in the lab. The noise sent chills down everyone's spines, rooting them to their seats. Just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature melted back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as it had come. Silence fell over the lab. No one dared move or speak. The implications of what they had witnessed were staggering. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just an animal. It was something far older, far darker, something that didn't belong in their world. Evelyn broke the silence first, her voice barely audible. "We've uncovered something we can't explain," she said, her words heavy with dread. "And I'm not sure we're equipped to handle it." The others nodded slowly, their faces pale and drawn. They had ventured into the unknown seeking answers, but instead they had awakened something ancient and unfathomable. Now they were trapped in a nightmare of their own making, unsure how or if they could escape. The days that followed the sighting of the creature were a blur of sleepless nights, frantic discussions, and mounting dread. Evelyn and her team found themselves caught in a strange limbo, unable to abandon the experiment but equally terrified of what might happen if they continued. The footage of the creature had been seared into their minds, its glowing eyes and monstrous form haunting their every thought. It wasn't just fear that paralyzed them. It was the overwhelming sense that they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. They weren't dealing with science anymore. They were treading into territory that defied logic, reason, and perhaps even sanity. Evelyn tried to hold on to her rationality, clinging to the principles of observation and analysis that had guided her career. But even she couldn't deny the growing unease gnawing at her insides. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the creature's silhouette looming over the grave, its claws glinting under the floodlights. She replayed the growl in her mind, the low, guttural sound that seemed to echo not just in her ears but in her very bones. It was as though the thing had marked them, claimed them somehow, simply by revealing itself. And now, it felt like only a matter of time before it came for them. Back at the lab, the team struggled to make sense of what they had witnessed. Marcus spent hours poring over books about cryptids and folklore, searching for anything that resembled the creature. Liam analyzed soil samples taken from around the grave, hoping to find traces of DNA or other biological evidence. Sarah monitored the cameras nonstop, her eyes glued to the screens as she waited for any sign of movement. But despite their efforts, no answers emerged. The creature remained an enigma, a shadowy figure that refused to be defined or contained. Evelyn, meanwhile, wrestled with guilt. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had unleashed something far beyond her control. "This is my fault," she muttered one night, sitting alone in the dimly lit lab while the others slept fitfully in nearby rooms. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened computer screen, hollow-eyed and pale. "I pushed too hard. I didn't think about the consequences." But deep down she knew there was no going back. Whatever they had awakened, it was already here. Ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear. If anything, running away would only leave them more vulnerable. So, with a heavy heart, she resolved to see this through. To uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. By day 50, the situation had spiraled further out of control. The cameras surrounding the grave continued to capture glimpses of the creature, always at night, always fleeting. Sometimes it prowled near the wooden marker, sniffing the air or scraping its claws against the ground. Other times it simply stood still, watching the cameras as if aware it was being observed. Its behavior grew bolder with each passing day, venturing closer to the edges of the floodlit area until it practically dared them to approach. One evening, Sarah noticed something new in the footage. The creature had begun leaving behind strange markings on the soil, deep gouges arranged, in patterns that looked almost deliberate. At first glance, they resembled symbols, though none of them matched any known language or script. When Evelyn examined the marks up close during another visit to the cemetery, she felt a chill run down her spine. The grooves were sharp and precise, as though made by something with immense strength and precision. Whoever, or whatever, was responsible, it was trying to communicate. "These aren't random scratches," Evelyn said, kneeling beside one of the symbols. She traced the outline with her finger, careful not to disturb the pattern. "It's a message, but who's it meant for?" Liam frowned, shaking his head. "If it's trying to talk to us, we're not equipped to understand. This isn't just some animal acting on instinct. This thing, it knows things. Things we don't." The words hung heavy in the air, unspoken fears taking shape between them. What did the creature know? And why had it chosen their experiment as its stage? As the anomalies escalated, so did the toll on the team. Sleep became a luxury few could afford, and paranoia crept into their interactions. Marcus started talking less, retreating into himself as he obsessively studied old texts and manuscripts. Sarah jumped at every sound, convinced the creature was lurking just outside the lab. Even Liam, usually calm and level-headed, began questioning whether they should destroy all the footage and walk away. Only Evelyn remained outwardly composed, though her resolve was cracking under the weight of responsibility. Late one night, after another round of reviewing the footage, Evelyn decided to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't rely solely on passive observation anymore. They needed answers, and fast. Gathering supplies, she drove back to the cemetery alone, determined to confront the source of the disturbances directly. Armed with flashlights, recording equipment, and a flare gun for protection, she approached the grave under the cover of darkness. The silence was oppressive as she stepped between the rows of headstones, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. She reached the site quickly, her breath fogging in the cold night air. Setting up additional cameras and microphones, she began broadcasting live to the lab, ensuring her team could witness whatever happened next. Then she waited. Minutes stretched into hours, and still, nothing moved. Just as doubt began creeping in, the ground beneath her feet trembled faintly. A low rumble echoed through the trees, growing louder with each passing second. Evelyn froze, her heart pounding as the sensation intensified. Suddenly, the creature emerged from the shadows, stepping into the light with terrifying clarity. It was larger than she had imagined, towering over her with muscles rippling beneath matted fur. Its elongated limbs ended in razor-sharp claws, and its feral eyes locked onto hers with unnerving focus. For a moment, neither of them moved. It simply stood there, studying her, as if weighing her worthiness. Then, without warning, it let out a deafening roar, the sound reverberating through the cemetery like a storm breaking loose. Evelyn stumbled backward, fumbling for the flare gun. Before she could fire, however, the creature turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only the acrid scent of decay. Trembling, she activated the flares, bathing the area in bright red light. The cameras captured everything: the creature's appearance, her reaction, and the lingering sense of dread that settled over the graveyard like a shroud. When she returned to the lab, the team gathered around her, their faces pale with shock. They had watched the entire encounter unfold in real time, unable to intervene. For the first time since the project began, Evelyn allowed herself to show vulnerability. Tears welled in her eyes as she recounted the experience, her voice trembling with emotion. "We can't keep doing this," she admitted finally. "We've gone too far. Whatever this thing is, it doesn't belong to us. We need to shut it down." Reluctantly, the others agreed. Over the next few days, they dismantled the equipment, erasing most of the footage and sealing off access to the data. Only fragments remained, enough to document their findings without risking exposure to the world. As Evelyn destroyed the final recordings, she felt a mix of relief and sorrow. They had uncovered something extraordinary, but at what cost? In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such an ordeal. The team dispersed, each member carrying the scars of their experience in different ways. Evelyn resigned from her position at the institute, unable to face the sterile walls of the lab without remembering the horrors they had unleashed. She moved to a quiet coastal town, seeking solace in the rhythm of the waves and the simplicity of solitude. Yet even there, the memories lingered. On quiet nights when the wind howled through the trees, she swore she could hear the faint echo of a growl in the distance. And sometimes when she walked along the beach at dawn, she thought she saw shadows moving just beyond the edge of the surf, shapes that shouldn't exist, watching her from the unknown depths. Whatever they had awakened, it hadn't forgotten them. The weeks turned into months, and though Evelyn had tried to leave the nightmare behind, it refused to let her go. The quiet coastal town she had chosen for its serenity became a prison of her own making. Every sound, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside her window, even the distant cry of seagulls, reminded her of the creature that had haunted their experiment. She told herself it was paranoia, the lingering trauma of what they had witnessed. But deep down, she knew better. The shadows were real. They followed her. At first, she tried to distract herself with mundane routines, long walks on the beach, reading books she couldn't remember finishing, cooking meals she barely tasted. But no matter how hard she worked to fill her days, the nights were unbearable. Sleep eluded her, and when it did come, it brought vivid dreams of glowing eyes and clawed hands reaching out from the darkness. She would wake drenched in sweat, her heart pounding as if the creature itself were standing at the foot of her bed. One evening, unable to bear another restless night, Evelyn decided to take a drive. The road along the coastline was desolate, lit only by the pale glow of the moon reflecting off the water. She rolled down the windows, letting the salty breeze wash over her face, hoping it might clear her mind. But as she rounded a bend in the road, something caught her eye, a figure standing motionless on the edge of the cliff. It was tall, impossibly so, silhouetted against the horizon. Her breath hitched in her throat. For a moment she considered speeding past, pretending she hadn't seen it. But curiosity, or perhaps some darker impulse, forced her to pull over. She stepped out of the car cautiously, her footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. The figure didn't move, its back turned toward her as if gazing out at the endless expanse of ocean below. As she approached, the wind carried a low, guttural sound, Not quite a growl, but close enough to send chills racing down her spine. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound brave. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if acknowledging her presence. Then, slowly, it turned to face her. Evelyn froze, her blood running cold. It wasn't human. Its features were distorted, almost liquid-like, shifting and rippling under the moonlight. Its eyes glowed faintly, the same feral intelligence she remembered from the cemetery. For a brief second, she thought it might attack. Instead, it raised one clawed hand pointing toward the sea. Evelyn followed its gaze, her heart pounding. Out beyond the waves, something massive stirred beneath the surface. A dark shape moved just below the water, too large to be a whale or any known marine creature. Whatever it was, it seemed alive and aware. She stumbled backward, her legs shaking beneath her. When she looked back at the figure, it was gone, vanished into thin air as though it had never been there. Back home, Evelyn couldn't shake the image of the shadowy figure or the monstrous form beneath the waves. She spent hours researching local legends, scouring old newspapers and archives for any mention of strange occurrences along the coast. What she found chilled her to the bone. Decades earlier, fishermen had reported sightings of a sea beast that dragged boats underwater and left survivors traumatized. Entire villages claimed to have been visited by shadowy figures who whispered warnings of doom before vanishing without a trace. Most dismissed these stories as superstition, but Evelyn saw them for what they truly were. Echoes of the same entity she and her team had awakened. Her guilt consumed her. She had always believed science could solve anything, answer any question. But now she understood the hubris of that belief. By digging deeper than anyone should, she had disturbed something, ancient and malevolent, something that didn't belong in the world of the living. And worse, she realized it wasn't finished with her yet. One stormy night, weeks after her encounter on the cliff, Evelyn heard a knock at her door. It was soft but insistent, cutting through the howling wind and rain. Her heart raced as she approached the entrance, peering through the peephole. No one was there. Still, the knocking continued, rhythmic and deliberate, like fingers tapping on wood. She grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, stepping onto the porch to investigate. The yard was empty, save for the swaying branches of trees and the sheets of rain cascading from the sky. Just as she was about to retreat inside, she noticed something on the ground, a single strand of coarse black hair identical to the ones they had found in the coffin. Her stomach churned as she picked it up, examining it under the dim light. It was wet, slick with seawater, and smelled faintly of decay. Suddenly, the air around her grew colder, the rain freezing mid-air as if time itself had stopped. Behind her, a voice whispered, low and guttural, words she couldn't understand. She turned slowly, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Standing there, mere feet away, was the creature. Its glowing eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time she felt not fear but clarity. This wasn't an attack, it was a reckoning. "You've been watching me," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "What do you want?" The creature tilted its head, studying her as if weighing her worthiness. Then, with deliberate slowness, it extended a clawed hand and pointed once again toward the sea. Evelyn nodded, understanding what it demanded. She had started this chain of events, and now she had to finish it. The next morning, Evelyn packed a bag with essentials and drove to the cliffs where she had seen the figure. The storm had passed, leaving behind a gray, overcast sky. She stood at the edge of the precipice, staring out at the vast expanse of water. Somewhere out there, the thing waited, patient, eternal, hungry. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, letting gravity take hold. As she plunged into the icy depths, the world around her dissolved into chaos. Currents pulled her downward, dragging her deeper than she thought possible. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, but she kept swimming, driven by an instinct she couldn't explain. Finally, she reached it, a cavernous opening in the seabed, illuminated by a faint greenish glow. Inside, she found the remains of others who had come before her, bones scattered across the floor, fragments of clothing and pieces of equipment that looked eerily familiar. At the center of the chamber loomed the creature, larger and more terrifying than ever. It regarded her silently, its glowing eyes filled with both menace and sorrow. Evelyn bowed her head, accepting her fate. In that moment, she understood the truth. The creature wasn't evil. It was a guardian tasked with protecting the boundary between worlds. By disturbing the grave, she had breached that boundary, allowing it to enter her realm. Now, she would pay the price. As the darkness closed in, Evelyn felt a strange sense of peace. She had sought answers all her life, and now she had found them, even if they came at a cost she could never have imagined. Above the surface, the waves settled, leaving no trace of what had transpired below. To the townsfolk, Evelyn Carter simply disappeared, another name added to the list of those claimed by the sea. But in the depths, her story lived on, a cautionary tale of curiosity, consequence, and the mysteries that lie buried where they belong.